Solve negative 20 plus negative 15 equals. Go ahead and pause the video, try to solve it yourself, and then press play to check your answer. Okay, negative 20 plus negative 15, that is what I'm seeing. So how do I solve this problem? We want to use something called the rule of sign, which states that anytime you are adding two numbers and they both have the same sign, you add them both and also keep the same sign. So let's go ahead, let me go ahead and solve this problem. 20 plus 15, that gives me 35, and then we keep the same sign. Because both numbers that I'm looking at, the 20 and the 15, both have the same sign of this negative. So negative 20, negative 15. They both have the same sign, so we add them both and then keep the same sign. So your answer is negative 35. That is your answer. Okay, another problem for practice. Let's say negative 15 plus negative 15 equals. Go ahead and pause the video, try to solve yourself, and then press play to check the answer. Okay. Negative 15 plus negative 15. We need to use that rule. Anytime that you have two numbers, they both have the same sign, you add them both and keep the same sign. So 15 plus 15, that gives you 30. And we need to keep the same sign. Negative 30 is your answer. That is your answer. Negative 30. Easy. All right. Let's say positive 7 or 7 plus 40 equals. Go ahead and pause the video, try it yourself, and then press play to check your answer. Okay, I am looking at two numbers. They both have the same sign. You don't see it, but there is an invisible positive sign next to the 7 and next to the 40. And they both have the same sign, which are the positives. And they want us to add both of those numbers. So the rule states if both numbers, if you're adding two numbers and they have the same sign, you add and keep the same sign. So 40 plus 7, that gives you 47. And we keep the same sign, which is positive 47. Positive 47. And that is your answer. Positive 47. That's a 4. 47. That's a 7. There. 47. All right, let's try another problem. 20 plus positive 3. Again, This 20 has a positive or an invisible positive sign. So make sure that you know it's a positive 20. And they want us to add to a positive 3. They both have the same sign. So just add and keep the same sign. So the answer is 20. Let's solve, or let's just add both numbers. 20 plus 3, that gives you 23. And then keep the same sign. So the answer is positive 23. Easy. All right, let's do a few more for practice. I'll give you negative 100 plus negative 50 equals, and negative 50 plus negative 2 equals, and the last one will be 100 plus positive 7 equals. Go ahead, pause the video, try to solve all 3 of these problems by yourself, and then press play to check your answer. Okay, now I am looking at negative 100 plus negative 50. So we need to use that rule where if you are adding 2 numbers, they both have the same sign, you add them and keep the same sign. So your answer should be 150, negative 150, because you add them. It gives you 150, and you want to keep the same sign. Next problem, negative 50 plus negative 2. Both numbers have the same sign, so we add and keep the same sign. So 50 plus 2, that gives you 52. You want to keep the same sign, which is negative 52. So your answer is negative 52. Last problem, 100 plus 7. So just know there's a divisible positive sign next to the 100, plus 7. Both numbers have the same sign. It's easy. Your answer will be 107, and it's positive. Circle this around there, because both numbers have the same sign, so you add them and keep the same sign. So we can just erase all this and just write positive 107, and that is your answer. In my last video, I was adding integers or numbers using a rule of sign, which states that anytime you are adding 2 numbers with the same sign, you add them both and keep the same sign. However, you cannot use that rule to solve this problem because both numbers have opposite signs. So negative 20 plus 15, the 20 is negative and the 15 is positive. So how can we solve this with a rule? Well, the rule is when you have two different signs, or if you are adding two numbers and they both have opposite signs, you subtract the smaller absolute value from the larger absolute value, and then keep the sign of the larger absolute value for your answer. So let's talk about absolute value first before we start solving negative 20 plus 15. So absolute value. So what is absolute value? The best way to put a, a good definition for absolute value is, let's start with a number. Let's say -4, which is an integer. And if you see these two vertical lines, these two vertical lines, and you have a number inside these two vertical lines, what that is telling you is these vertical lines is that it represent the operation of finding the absolute value of -4. So -4 is not the absolute value. That is just a number. The absolute value is going to be 4. And the reason why it's 4 is because the absolute value refers to the distance from 0 on the number line. And it doesn't matter if the number inside these two lines is a negative or positive, it's going to be positive as your absolute value, because we only look at the distance or the units away from 0. So you're 4 units away from 0. Now, let's go back to the problem. -20 plus 15. And we need to look for the absolute value of -20 and 15. So -20, and we need to find the absolute value of this number, -20, which is 20. So you're 20 spaces or 20 units away from 0. And then 15, it's a positive 15, which is the absolute value is 15. So we found our two absolute value, which is 20 and 15. And we know that 20, or the absolute of 20, is bigger than 15, right? Now, the next step is to subtract the smaller absolute value from the larger absolute value. So 20 minus 15 equals, so 20 take away 15, that's 5. Then the answer will take, which is the 5, the answer is the 5. The answer will take the sign from the original number that had the larger absolute value. So the 20 is the largest, it's larger than 15. So that is your larger absolute value. And we're going to take that negative from the original number here that gave us the absolute value of 20 and give that to the 5. So your answer is -5. That is your answer. And that is how you solve these type of problems. So there you go. Now let's practice. Let's say we have -5 plus 15. That equals. So pause the video, try to solve it yourself, and then press play to check your answer. Okay. Now, we need to find the absolute value of these two numbers, -5 and +15, because they are different. We're adding two numbers with opposite signs, and the rule states that anytime you are adding two numbers that have opposite signs, you subtract the smaller absolute value from the larger absolute value, and then keep the sign of the larger absolute value for your answer. So let's go ahead and find the absolute value of 5. So 5, -5, that gives us 5. So 5 is the absolute value, and then 15, the absolute value of 15, the number 15 is 15. So you're 15 units away from 0, and then you're 5 units away from 0. So which absolute value is bigger? 15 is bigger than 5. So our answer will be a positive because we're going to take the sign from the original number that gave us the biggest or the larger absolute value, which is 15. So we need to subtract 15 minus 5. That gives us, so 15 take away 5 is 10. And then we're going to take the positive from the original 15 and give it to the 10. So the answer is positive 10 or just 10. That is your answer. There you go. Now, there is a trick that we can use. That way we are not writing all this information down. The trick is 1, identify the absolute value. I'm going to write abs for short, absolute value. Actually, I'm going to write the whole thing. And I'm going to make this a little bit better. Write this a little bit better. So, identify the absolute value that is the first thing you do. 2, you will subtract the large. Now I'll go ahead and say abs, and I'll just say abs v there. Subtract the large absolute value minus small absolute value. And then 3, your answer will take the sign of the original number that had the larger absolute value. So let me go ahead and write all that. The answer will take the sign of the original number that had the larger absolute value. So let me go ahead and write a problem here. Let's say negative 20, negative 20, plus positive 15 equals. So the first thing you do is identify the absolute value. You should know that negative 20 is the number. And then mentally just think, okay, negative 20, the absolute value of negative 20 is 20. And then the absolute value of this number 15 is 15. So you subtract 20 minus 15. That's the second step. Subtract large absolute value minus small absolute value. So 20 minus 15, 20 is bigger than 15. That gives you 5. And then the last one is the answer will take the sign of the original number that had the larger absolute value. So the 20 is the larger absolute value, and the original number is negative 20. So you take that negative sign from the negative 20 or the 20 and give it to the 5. So the answer is negative 5. Easy. And there you go. Anytime you're adding two numbers with opposite signs, you apply the rule of signs or sign for opposite signs. And there are a few steps to take. There are 3. The first one is identify. Let me write that a little bit better. Write the word identify. Identify the absolute values. Absolute values. So what is an absolute value? An absolute value will look something like this. You have 2 vertical lines, and then you have like some number inside of it. Let me write this on the left side of the screen underneath the problem. And let's use the negative 12 for the number. So let's say we want to find the absolute value, which is what we need to do, negative 12. This negative 12, it is just a number. It is just a number. It is not the absolute value. The 2 vertical lines want us to find the absolute value of this number, negative 12. So the absolute value of this number, negative 12, will tell us the distance or the distance away from 0. This negative 12 will tell its distance away from 0. So what I mean by that is, let me go ahead and draw the number line. And then 0, 5, 10, and somewhere here 12. We are 12 units away from 0. That is your absolute value, 12. 12 units away from 0. And 12 will always be positive because we're looking at the distance away from 0. Now let's look for the absolute value of 6. Mentally, we know it's 6 units away from 0. So let's just write it down. The absolute value of this number, negative 6, is 6. Easy. Number 2, subtract both of them from larger minus smaller equals. Subtract them, or subtract both. So larger minus smaller equals, we're looking at the absolute values. So the larger absolute value is 12, and the smaller is 6. So the answer is 6. You take 6 away from 12, gives you 6. The third step is to take the sign of the original number that gave you the larger absolute value. So we are looking at 12 being the larger absolute value, and then the original number is this negative 12. And we're going to take that sign and give it to our answer, 6. And so the answer is negative 6. And I'll write that for the third step. Third step, take from, take sign from original number that gave you larger absolute value. Easy. Let's do a couple problems for practice. Let's say negative 20 plus 15. Go ahead and pause the video, try to solve it yourself, and then press play to check your answer. Okay, I am looking at two numbers, negative 20, positive 15. We are adding two numbers with opposite signs, so we have to use the rule of sign and follow those 3 steps. Find or identify the absolute values, subtract them from larger to smaller, and then take away the sign from the original number that gave us the larger absolute value. So let's go ahead and start with the absolute value. So we have absolute value negative 20. So we need to find the absolute value of this number, negative 20, which is 20. So we're 20 units away from 0. And then the absolute value of the number 15, we are 15 units away from 0. And then the second step is to subtract larger minus smaller. 20 is bigger than 15. So 20 minus 15. So 20 take away 15. That's 5. And then we need to take away take the sign from the original number that gave us the larger absolute value, which is 20. So take this negative, give it to the 5, and the answer is negative 5. Easy. Let's do another problem. Let's say negative 5 plus 15 equals. Go ahead and pause the video, try to solve it yourself, and then press play to check your answer. Okay, we are adding two numbers with opposite signs. So mentally, think about the absolute value. So we are 5 units away from 0. 5 units away from 0. So the absolute value is 5. And then we are 15 units away from 0. So the absolute value is 15. And then we need to subtract larger minus smaller. 15 is larger, so 15 minus 5. So 15 take away 5 is 10. And then we look at the sign from the original number that gave us the larger absolute value, which is 15. There's an invisible positive sign there. We'll take that positive sign, give it to the 10, and the answer is positive 10. That is your answer. Let's try another problem. Let's say let's say 9 plus negative 7. Go ahead and pause the video, try to solve yourself, and then press play to check your answer. Okay, so I'm looking at two numbers with opposite signs, and we're adding both numbers. We apply the rule with the identifying the absolute value, subtract, and then take away the sign of the original number that gave you the larger absolute value. So 9 is the absolute value, and 7 is the absolute value. And we subtract both. 9 minus 7 from bigger to smaller. 9 minus 7 is 2. And then we take the sign from the original number that gave us the larger absolute value and give it to the 2. And so the answer is positive 2. Easy. Okay, one more problem for practice. Let's say negative 8 plus 10, positive 10. Go ahead and pause the video, try to solve it yourself, and then press play to check your answer. Okay, I'm adding two numbers with opposite signs. Mentally, look for the absolute value for both. So the absolute value of negative 8 is 8. The absolute value of 10, the number 10 is 10. And then we subtract large to small. 10 minus 8. So 10, take away 8. That gives you 2. And then we take the sign from the original number that gave us the larger absolute value. So take this positive, give it to the 2, and so your answer is 2. And there you go. Let's start with negative 5 minus positive 3 equals. How can we solve this problem? We need to use the rule of sign for subtracting. Rule of sign for subtracting. Subtracting or subtraction. There. And there are two simple steps. Step 1, you want to change the operation from subtracting to adding. Subtracting to adding. There. Second step is to flip the sign of the second integer. Oops, that's not how you spell integer. There. And then we need to look at this problem, -5 minus 3. And -5 will be your first integer. +3 will be your second integer. And then this minus will be your operation. And so the two steps are asking us to first change the operation from subtracting to adding. So I'll write it here. I'll write -5. We went from minus to adding. And then flip the sign of the second integer. So we need to flip the sign positive to negative and then write 3. And then this is the new problem to solve for the original problem, -5 minus 3. And then we add the rules for adding same signs. Look at that, -5 plus -3. So the rule of sign for addition is anytime you are adding two numbers and they both have the same sign, you add them both and keep the same sign. So 5 plus 3 is 8, and we keep the same sign. So the answer is -8. Easy. Next thing, let's practice. We can start with 10 minus 3. Write that a little better. Minus 3. Go ahead and pause the video, try to solve it yourself, and then press play to check your answer. 10 minus 3. All right, let's solve this problem together. So we have 10 minus 3. Let's change it to 10 plus -3. That is the rule of sign for subtraction. We change the operation from negative or minus to adding. And then we flip the second integer, which is 3, and flip it to -3. And so the rules for opposite signs, when you're adding two numbers with opposite signs, you need to find the absolute value for both integers. So they want you to write the absolute value for 10 or solve the absolute value for 10 and -3. What is an absolute value? The absolute value will look something like this. You have 10 inside these two vertical lines. This symbolizes absolute value. And this number inside of it, or inside the two vertical lines, tell us the number. It is just a number. It is just a number. Let me write that better. It's just a number. And same thing for finding the absolute value for -3. -3, it is just a number. It is not the absolute value. Now, the absolute value, let me go ahead and erase all that. There. The absolute value. So the absolute value refers to the distance from 0. So you have a number line like this. Yeah, you have 0, 5, 10, 15, and so on. That's your number line. So the absolute value refers to the distance from 0, regardless if it's positive or negative. So this 10, it is just a number. These vertical lines want us to find the absolute value of 10. So the absolute value of 10 is the distance away from 0. So from 0, oh wow, I cannot connect it to the 10. So from 0, there we go. You are 10 units or spaces away from 0. So the answer for this number, this absolute value of this number 10, is 10 units or 10 or positive 10. And then for the -3, you are, I don't think that's 3. 3 will be somewhere in the middle, like here. There. Number 3 is 3 units away from 0, or 3 units away. So the absolute value of this -3 will be 3, or 3 units. But normally you write the positive number 3. Okay. Erase all this. So now that we understand the absolute value, or what is an absolute value, mentally, we just know that the absolute value of this number, 10, the absolute value will be 10. And then the absolute value of -3 is 3. And then we subtract from large to small. So you subtract the subtract large minus small absolute values. So 10 is bigger than 3. So 10 minus 3. So 10 take away 3. You have 7. So 10 take away 3. You have 7. And then the last step of this additional rule for the rule of sign, for opposite signs, you want to take the sign from the original number that gave you the large absolute value. So 10 or positive 10, that is the number that gave you the larger absolute value, which is 10. So we go ahead and take this positive, give it to the 7, and your answer is positive 7. Easy. All right, let's try another problem for practice. Let's say -10 minus -10 equals. So go ahead and pause the video, try to solve it yourself, and then press play to check your answer. Okay, we need to flip this or change this subtracting problem to an additional problem. So I'm going to go ahead and bring down the negative 10. This will be a positive. Negative 10 becomes a positive 10. And I am adding two numbers with opposite signs. And so we need to find the absolute value of both numbers. Mentally, I know the absolute value of negative 10 is 10. And the absolute value of positive 10 is 10. And then we subtract from large absolute value minus the small absolute value. So 10 and 10 are the same, so we can't say 10 is bigger than 10. They're both the same. So we're just going to subtract them, and that gives you 0. So you don't need to apply the last rule, or the last step, which is take the sign from the original number that gave you the larger absolute value. You can't do it here because 10 and 10 are the same. So you just subtract and it gives you 0. All right, let's try another problem. Let's say 5, positive 5, minus 10. Go ahead and pause the video, try to solve it yourself, and then press play to check the answer. Okay. We need to convert or change this problem to a additional problem to solve this problem. So 5 minus 10. So let's go ahead and write down 5 plus negative 10 because we changed the operation from subtracting to adding. And then we flip the second integer from positive 10 to negative 10. And now we are adding or using the rule of sign for adding two numbers with opposite signs. And that states that we need to subtract. So let's go ahead and subtract from large. Oops. We can't subtract until we say absolute value. So the absolute value of 5 is 5. And the absolute value of negative 10, the number negative 10, oops, not a comma, vertical line, is 10. Let me write that a little bit better. It's 10. So we subtract large minus small absolute values. So the large absolute value is 10. 10 is bigger than 5. So we go ahead and write 10 minus 5. So 10, take away 5 is 5. And then you take the sign of the original number that gave you the larger absolute value, which is negative 10. So this negative sign, let me write this a little bit bigger. Negative 10 gave you the absolute value 10, and 10 is bigger than 5, so that's why I circled it as the larger absolute value. And so now we're going to take the sign from the original number that gave us the larger absolute value, which is this negative, and then give it to the 5. So the answer is negative 5. Easy. Okay, one more problem for practice. Let's say negative 25 minus positive 35. Go ahead and pause the video, try to solve it yourself, and then press play to check your answer. Okay, so the first thing I do is just bring down the first integer down because we're subtracting two numbers. And I want to turn it into an additional problem. And then I change the operation from minus to adding. And then we need to flip the positive 35 to negative 35. And then we work from here. So we need to add, well, we need to use the rule of sign for adding same signs. So we have negative 25 plus negative 35. And the rule states that if you're adding two numbers with the same sign, you add them both and keep the same sign. So 25 plus 35 gives you 60, and then we keep the same sign. So the answer is negative 60. And there you go. We have negative 9 times negative 9 equals, and we have 5 times negative 9 equals. How do we supposed to solve these two problems? Well, we need to apply something called the rule of sign for multiplying. Let me go ahead and write that down. Rule of sign for multiplying. Multiplying. There we go. Rule of sign for multiplying. And there are two steps to take. The first step is anytime you are multiplying two numbers and they have the same sign, you multiply them both and your answer will be positive. So let me go ahead and write that down. Same signs, multiply. Let me write this a little bit better. Multiply. And answer will be positive. And then step 2 is the opposite. So if you are multiplying two numbers and they have different signs, so different signs, you multiply and answer will be negative. There you go. So I'll read this again. So first step, you look at the problem, and if you're multiplying two numbers and they have the same sign, you multiply them both and your answer will be positive. And then if you look at a problem, this is step 2. If you look at a problem and you're multiplying two numbers and they have different signs, you multiply them both and then the answer will be negative. So let's solve these two problems. Negative 9 times negative 9. Pause the video, try to solve it yourself, and then press play to check your answer. Okay, let's solve this problem. I am looking at negative 9 times negative 9. This applied to the first step. The first step states if you're multiplying two numbers with the and they both have the same signs, you multiply them both, and the answer will be positive. So 9 times 9 is 9 times 9 is 81 and needs to stay positive. So the answer will be 81. All right, the second problem, 5 times -9. Now go ahead and pause the video, try to solve it yourself, and then press play to check your answer. All right, let's solve this problem. 5 times -9. I am looking at two numbers with different signs, and the second step applies to this problem. The second step is saying anytime you're multiplying two numbers and they have different signs, you multiply them both, and your answer will be negative. So I'll go ahead and just leave or write a negative right next to the equal signs there to the right. So 5 times 9 is, so 5 times 9 is, what is 5 times 9? 45. There we go. Just checking on you. So 5 times 9 is 45, and your answer will be 45. And that's your answer. All right, let's do a couple more problems. Let's say 4 times -9. So go ahead and pause the video, try to solve it yourself, and then press play to check your answer. All right, let's solve this problem together. 4 times -9. So both numbers that we're multiplying, they have different signs, so we need to make sure that the answer is negative. So what is 9 or 4 times 9? 4 times 9. What is the answer? It's 36. So, all right, 36. And it's a -36. So 36. -36 is the answer. Cool. All right, let's try another problem for practice. Let's say 10 times 10. Let's put these around it. 10 times 10. Go ahead and pause the video and solve it yourself and press play to check your answer. All right, I am looking at 10 times 10, and they both have positive signs. You can't see them, they're invisible, but they're there. I have a positive 10 times a positive 10. So 10 times 10 is 100. And both numbers that you're multiplying, they both have the same sign. So you leave it positive. Your answer will stay positive. So your answer is positive 100. All right, let's look at another problem. Let's say -3 times 7. Go ahead and pause the video, try to solve it yourself, and then press play to check your answer. Okay, let's solve this problem together. -3 times 7. They both have different signs. So we need to make sure that our answer is negative. So what is 3 times 7? It's 21. And we need to make sure that the answer is negative 21. So your answer is negative 21. All right, let's do another problem. Let's say 6 times -7. Go ahead and pause the video, try to solve it yourself, and then press play to check your answer. Okay, let's solve this problem together. We have 6 times -7. Uh-oh. They both have different signs, so that means our answer will be negative. So what is 6 times 7? 6 times 7 is 42. 42. So the answer will be -42. Easy. All right, let's do a few more and then we're done. Let's say, and these few, we won't need to pause the video and have you solve it. We'll just solve it quickly. All right, so let's say 5 times, or -5 times -5. So both numbers that we're multiplying, they both have the same sign, so that applies to the first step. Anytime you're multiplying two numbers and they have the same signs, the answer will be positive. So what is 5 times 5? 25. And the answer will stay positive. So the answer is 25. Or 25 without the positive sign. All right, one more. Let's say 9 or -9 times -2. Again, this applies to the first step. You're multiplying two numbers with the same sign. So what is 9 times 2? It's 18. And we need to make sure that the answer is negative, so it's -18. Because we're multiplying two numbers. Oops, my mistake. It's a positive, stays positive. Because we are multiplying two numbers with the same sign, so we need to make sure that the answer stays positive. Now, if it was the other way around, let me go ahead and erase this and rewrite -9 times 2, +2. Then we apply the second step. You're multiplying two numbers with different signs, so your answer needs to be negative. And that will be -18 as your answer. And there you go. Easy.